Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. They say night shifts are slow, quiet, predictable, but in one suburban convenience store, the final hours of the day unravel into something else entirely. It starts with a routine. Every night, around 3 a.m., the bell above the door rings. A man steps in, tall, always in the same worn beige coat, with pale eyes that seem to scan through more than just the merchandise. He never speaks, just walks down the third aisle, picks up a pack of matches, and stands at the register. He pays in exact change. Not a cent more, not a cent less. The employees call him Mr. 3 because he only appears at 3 a.m. Always alone, always silent. Some say he's a homeless man. Others think he's just eccentric. But everyone agrees on one thing: he never leaves while you're watching. Shift logs show him coming in. Surveillance footage confirms it. But not once has a recording shown him walking back out. At first, it was dismissed as a technical glitch. Cameras malfunction. People forget. It's late. Brains are foggy. But after a while, new hires start noticing it too. They even started making it a game. Staring at the exit after he buys the matches, daring him to leave. Blinking only when they can't stand the dryness in their eyes. He never does. The moment your gaze shifts, just for a second, he's gone. Not out the door. Not in the parking lot. Just not there. One clerk, Danny, got curious. He checked every inch of the store after a visit. Nothing. No footprints. No open door. No lingering scent of smoke or musty fabric. But later, when reviewing security tapes, Danny saw something that froze his blood. A reflection. On the convex mirror near aisle 3, just a flash of it, a dozen figures. All wearing beige coats. All standing behind the real one. All staring back at the camera. The footage cut out 1 second later. Management was called. The tape was confiscated. Danny was told he must have doctored it. He was let go that week. Still, the man kept coming. Then one night, a new clerk, Mel, decided to follow him. She waited until he walked into aisle 3 and stepped around the back to cut him off. But the aisle was empty. She checked the bathroom, the office, even the locked cold storage. Nothing. Yet on the counter sat the matchbox and the exact change. The next morning, Mel quit. And yet, on the store's attendance records, it shows she never clocked out. Months passed. The legend of Mr. 3 became an unofficial hazing ritual for new hires. Don't blink when the last customer comes in, they'd say with a grin that never quite reached their eyes. But the story changed again one rainy Thursday, when the overnight clerk, Tomas, decided to confront him. When the bell rang at 3 a.m., Tomas was ready, armed with a flashlight and sheer adrenaline. He stood his ground as the man approached. "Who are you?" Tomas asked. "Silence. What do you want?" The man placed the matchbox on the counter. Slowly, deliberately, but this time he didn't pay. He just stared. Not at Tomas but past him, through him, as if seeing something not yet here. Tomas reached for the phone behind the counter. That's when the lights flickered. The air thickened. And the store went completely silent. No humming fridges, no buzzing signs. Dead quiet. Then the man finally spoke. "This place remembers." His voice was flat, ageless, not threatening, just final. And then he smiled. Not wide, just enough to stretch the lines of his face like old leather. The lights snapped back on. The man was gone. The matchbox was open. Inside were not matches, but names. 27 names, handwritten on thin strips of receipt paper. Each name matched a former employee, everyone who had ever worked the 3 a.m. shift. And at the bottom of the box was Tomas' name. He brought it to the manager, who refused to even look. "It's just a prank," they insisted. "Don't feed into the paranoia." But 2 days later, Tomas vanished. His car still in the lot, his drawer still balanced, his name still on the schedule. Yet nobody could remember his last words. Now the night shift runs automatically. Fewer employees want it. Cameras have been replaced, but still never show the last customer leaving. The bell rings at 3 a.m. The man walks in, buys his matchbox, places exact change on the counter. But now, some nights, he says something different. Just before vanishing, just before the static glitch in the footage, he whispers, "Still open, still remembering." And behind him, just for a frame, are more figures, pale-eyed, beige coats, each holding a matchbox. And each time he visits, one more box appears beneath the counter, empty, except for a name. And there's always room for one more. At first, it was just a routine glitch. That's what the night supervisor told himself. Camera 6, facing the rear loading dock, cut to static for exactly 6 minutes every night. Always at 3:17 a.m. There were no power surges, no equipment issues. The cables were new. But every single night for almost 3 weeks, that camera would flicker, crackle, then die. The footage would pick back up at 3:23, like nothing happened. No movement, no signs of tampering, just that black, silent gap. Then came the footprints. They first noticed them when inventory began going missing, small things at first. A flashlight, a box cutter, an unopened crate of merchandise. Items that could have been written off as miscounts. Until one morning, someone spotted the prints in the dust just outside the dock doors. Bare feet, long strides, for toes on the left foot. The security team reviewed the other cameras. Nothing showed anyone entering, but camera 6 still dropped to black. At 3:17 a.m., a technician was brought in, a skeptical one. He stayed the night, monitoring the live feeds in the control room with the supervisor. They laughed it off until 3:17 arrived. Then the static rolled in like a wave. Camera 6 crackled and cut. The technician tried to reroute the signal, but something was blocking it. Not a physical interference. It was like the signal had been suppressed. When the feed returned, the dock was empty. But the technician wasn't laughing anymore, because now camera 3, facing the hallway near the dock, showed something else. A frame-by-frame analysis revealed it, a blur at the corner, tall, elongated. Not a person, not even close. They enhanced the footage. It was there for 3 frames only, bent backward at the torso, knees inverted, head tilted far too far, like its neck didn't care about human anatomy. And behind it, more bare footprints. The technician never returned. He quit the following day and refused to speak about it. That week, employees on the graveyard shift started reporting strange sounds. Metal dragging across concrete, whispering through the ventilation, and humming. Not like a voice, more like something electrical trying to imitate speech. One janitor claimed he heard the humming resolve into actual words. 3 to be exact. "We found it." The supervisor, under pressure, ordered camera 6 replaced. They even upgraded the power supply. On the night of the installation, he stayed late to monitor the results. But 3:17 came, and this time every screen froze. Not static, just frozen. All 15 cameras stopped. The only feed that returned was camera 6. But it didn't show the loading dock. It showed the inside of the security room. Live footage from behind the supervisor. He turned instantly, but no one was there. He stared at the screen, his own back, his hand moving, reaching out, but he wasn't moving. His hands were still, frozen in place. Then the image distorted. The camera feed glitched again. And now he wasn't in it anymore. The room on the screen was empty. The real room was not. That's when the alarm system triggered itself. Not from the dock, from inside the building, the exact spot beneath camera SIX's wiring closet. It shouldn't have been accessible. It wasn't even marked on the blueprints. By the time backup arrived, the supervisor was gone. Only one thing remained. A still frame burned into the monitor. A black screen with white text that no one could explain. It read, "You shouldn't have watched." From that night on, camera 6 never blacked out again. But it never showed the dock either. It showed a long hallway, unlit, wet, with walls that pulsed like something organic. No one could identify the location. It wasn't part of the building. One brave tech tried to trace the signal origin. What they found: camera 6 wasn't connected to the system anymore. Hadn't been for days. And yet, the feed played every night at 3:17 a.m. Without fail. Always showing that hallway. Sometimes, shadows move across the frame. Sometimes, they stop and stare. And sometimes, their shapes look just like people who used to work there. People who haven't been seen since the night their shifts ended. At 3:23 a.m. They said the building never truly closed. A 24-hour distribution center, where lights flickered through the night and forklifts whispered across polished concrete floors. But between 11:59 and 12:01, there was a pause in everything. Machinery quieted. Music in the break room skipped. Clocks hesitated. It was the only time no one moved except him. No one hired the midnight janitor. No one trained him, no records, no HR paperwork. Yet every night, like clockwork, he appeared. Pale uniform, green gloves, push broom. He never spoke, never made eye contact, just swept, cleaned, mopped invisible stains that returned each night like ritual blood. First, no one questioned it. A big warehouse attracts strange workers, temps, subcontractors, the kind of people who show up for a few weeks and vanish. But then the rumors started. Old Terry in receiving claimed he saw the janitor pass through a locked gate without opening it. A young guy on inventory swore the man walked into the walk-in freezer and never came out. But 5 minutes later, was spotted sweeping the break room with frost still on his shoulders. Security tried tracing him on the cameras. That's when things got worse. Each time they reviewed the footage, the entire hour of midnight was corrupted. Not just one camera, all of them. Static and blackness until 12:01. And when they fast-forwarded through the blackout, the floors were spotless. The mess gone. Trash bins emptied. Just as if he'd been there, but never seen. Someone joked that he must be a ghost. But then someone else asked, if he's a ghost, what is he cleaning up? No one laughed after that. One supervisor tried confronting him. A man named Dirk, all bravado and caffeine. Midnight struck, and Dirk waited. At exactly 12 a.m., the janitor appeared near Dock 4. Dirk walked toward him. Witnesses later said the two made eye contact, and the janitor paused. Then Dirk screamed. Not a panicked yell or an angry shout, but a raw, agonizing scream, like something had been pulled out of him. He was found hours later curled beneath a conveyor belt, hands bleeding, nails torn. He wouldn't speak, not about what he saw, just kept repeating, "He's not supposed to be here." Dirk quit 2 days later, moved states, no forwarding address. Still, the janitor kept cleaning. Some workers began bringing offerings. Coffee, cigarettes, even handwritten notes left on mop buckets, out of fear, not reverence, hoping he would pass them by, hoping he would ignore their section of the warehouse. And usually he did, but sometimes he would stop, pause near someone's workstation, tilt his head, as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. Then, without warning, he'd vanish, just gone, like steam dissipating in fluorescent light. Those were the workers who often called out sick the next day. And the next. Some never came back. Some were found asleep in their cars after shifts, whispering things like, "He sees what we've done," or, "It's not dirt he's sweeping, it's memory." Maintenance once attempted to lock the janitor's closet, that tiny, unused room near the freight elevator. But no matter how many chains or padlocks they used, it was always open again by morning. Inside, just a mop, but it was always wet, smelling faintly of old bleach and something else, metallic, decaying, ancient. The warehouse tried replacing the floor tiles, hired a real cleaning company, brand new buffing machines. The next day, every floor was scuffed again, and sitting silently in the corner, the mop. By then, people began quitting. High turnover. HR couldn't explain it. Some claimed it was poor lighting, graveyard depression. Others mumbled about paranormal fatigue. But those who stayed began noticing patterns. Whenever the janitor appeared, something strange followed within the week. A shipment would go missing. A wall would crack. A section of the roof would leak despite no rain. It was as if his presence signaled a pressure building underneath the concrete. Then one night, a new employee, Samantha, made a mistake. She spoke to him. She thought he looked lonely. That's what she told the others. She was kind, sweet, too empathetic for graveyard shifts. She offered him her extra coffee and said, "You don't have to clean every night. Take a break." The janitor stopped sweeping. He turned to her slowly and smiled. Samantha went home that morning. She didn't speak, didn't eat. Her boyfriend said she just stared at their hallway mirror for hours. The next night, she didn't show up for her shift. Instead, the janitor began sweeping near her old station, and the floor where she stood, it began to peel, not like dirt, like time itself, like something beneath the surface was being scrubbed loose. One worker dared to peel up a tile there. Beneath it, not concrete, but paper, old yellow documents, employment forms, names no one recognized, dates decades past, and on top of them a cleaning schedule. It listed only one name, every night, every shift, position, custodial, name, redacted, hours, 11:59 p.m. to 12:01 a.m. Purpose, containment. There was a note at the bottom, smudged, barely legible. Do not interrupt the cycle. That tile was sealed shut again. Quickly, silently, no one ever mentioned it out loud. But the janitor never paused in that section again. Now the midnight cleaning continues. Employees avert their eyes. New hires aren't told anything. They either learn or they leave. And those who stay know the rule. When the clocks stutter and everything feels too quiet, don't look at him. Don't speak. And above all, let him clean. They called it aisle 13, even though officially the store only had 12. A strange quirk of layout, they said. It was a narrow, dead-end space between pet supplies and cleaning products, too slim for carts, too tucked away for customers to linger. But the employees knew better. They avoided it, even during the day, especially at night. Marcus had worked the overnight shift at Delway Mart for 3 years. He knew the usual late-night rhythms, the flicker of overhead lights, the hum of refrigeration units, the occasional lost soul wandering through the aisles at 2 a.m. But aisle 13 made his stomach twist in ways he couldn't explain. It started with a misplaced item, a ceramic dog statue, heavy and ornate, sitting neatly on the top shelf in that forgotten gap. Marcus didn't remember unpacking it. Nobody did. He scanned it, no barcode. Checked the inventory system, nothing listed. He chalked it up to a prank until the next night, when it had moved. Slightly, just an inch, angled toward him, as if it had turned on its own. He brought it up to security, said it was weird, possibly dangerous. Maybe someone hiding in the store. So they checked the footage. And that's when things got strange. The camera aimed directly at aisle 13. Perfect view. But when they played it back, it skipped. Just for that part. The timestamp jumped, a half-second blank. No glitch anywhere else. They rewound, slowed it down. Still, every time that aisle was in frame, the image cut, distorted, then returned with nothing changed, except for the statue inching closer to the aisle's edge. Marcus wasn't the only one who noticed. Karen from stock said she saw a man standing there around 3 a.m., staring at the shelf like he was waiting for something. When she greeted him, he turned slowly, too slowly, and walked away. She followed, thinking he needed help. But when she turned the corner, he was gone.
No exit alarm triggered.
No door opened. She reviewed the security tapes herself. Watched it 5 times. She wasn't on screen. Neither was the man. The camera showed only a still, empty aisle. Even the lighting looked wrong, dimmer, grainier, almost like it was filmed decades ago. Within a week, the staff started whispering. Nobody wanted to check aisle 13 during rounds. When they had to, they kept their eyes down, moved fast. One employee quit on the spot after doing inventory and finding their own handwriting on a label. A label they swore they hadn't written. What unnerved Marcus most wasn't the statue or the man. It was the way the footage refused to obey time. On one occasion, while fast-forwarding through his shift, he watched himself walk into aisle 13 at 3:06 a.m. and never come out. But he remembered leaving. He remembered finishing the shift, driving home, eating leftover pasta at 5:30 a.m. Yet the footage disagreed. He walked in, paused, looked toward the end of the aisle, and then nothing. The camera kept rolling.
No cuts.
Just an empty hallway. His reflection flickered briefly in the freezer glass nearby, but it didn't match his movements. The reflection kept walking when he'd stopped. The corporate tech team was called in. They checked the system, replaced the camera, rewired the DVR, and still the same thing happened. Footage of aisle 13 refused to behave. Any person walking into frame would vanish for the length of the aisle, reappearing on the other end with no transition. Just a cut, like something had erased the in-between. Then came the incident with Doug. Doug was skeptical. Loud, brash, thought it was all a joke. One night, he brought a Polaroid camera and said he'd prove there was nothing wrong. He walked into the aisle, joking loudly, clicking photos. But when he came out, he was pale, sweating. He said the man was real. Not just a shadow, not just a trick of the lights. A tall figure in a gray coat, eyes like black glass, standing perfectly still halfway down the aisle. Doug raised his camera to snap a picture, and the man smiled. Barely, like he knew the rules didn't apply to him. Like he wanted to be seen but not recorded. The Polaroids came out blank. Not overexposed, just blank. No aisle, no shelves, no light, just void. Doug didn't come back after that. Marcus kept thinking about what the man in the coat wanted. Why he never showed up on tape. Why the footage bent around him. He realized something one night while reviewing old tapes, archival backups from years ago. There was a flicker of movement in the same aisle, dated long before Marcus had ever worked there. A blurry figure with a similar coat. No face, just a presence. standing in the exact same spot. It was always the same time, between 3:06 and 3:17 a.m., always just barely visible, never clear, never caught. There was no record of any aisle 13 ever being built. The layout blueprints skipped it entirely. No SKU labels were ever assigned to its shelves. The space shouldn't exist, but it does. And still, the man waits there. Employees say the store is cursed. But that's too simple. It's not a curse. It's an overlap, a bleed-through, a place where time doesn't line up and something ancient watches from behind the thin fabric of reality. And cameras, technology can't comprehend it. They record nothing because nothing is what they're allowed to see. Not long after, Marcus requested a transfer. His last shift was quiet. Too quiet. He walked his final round at 3 a.m. One last glance at aisle 13, and for a moment, just a split second, he saw himself, already standing at the other end, facing him, smiling. And the next morning, the cameras rolled, but no one saw Marcus leave. He never showed on the tape. It started like any other Tuesday graveyard shift, silent, cold, and impossibly long. The kind of night that makes seconds stretch like hours. The only light came from flickering fluorescence overhead, and the hum of the vending machine at the end of the hall was the only real sound that broke the silence. But this wasn't just about a strange snack. This was about something that wasn't supposed to exist at all. At 3:06 a.m., the vending machine beeped once. No one touched it. No one stood near it. Yet the coil turned. Something dropped into the tray. At first, they thought it was a malfunction. One of those random free dispenses that happen once in a blue moon. But when Jamie, the janitor, went to retrieve it, the object inside wasn't a snack. It was a note, folded precisely, old paper, yellowed and damp at the corners like it had been stored somewhere dark for too long. In block letters, it read, "Do not eat what comes next." They laughed it off, thought maybe it was a prank, something a bored coworker stuffed inside. But then the machine beeped again. This time it didn't stop. It beeped 11 times in a row, each beep followed by a loud metallic clunk, like something heavy was forced down the chute. Inside the tray was a single plastic-wrapped item. No label, no branding, just a plain foil wrapper with greasy fingerprints smudged into it. Jamie picked it up, then immediately recoiled. It was warm, sweating like it had just come out of an oven. But the vending machine didn't even stock hot food. He left it on the counter in the break room. Didn't want to touch it again. At 3:17 a.m., another note appeared. This one didn't come from the machine. It was slipped under the break room door. Same paper, same handwriting. "You've seen it now. That means it sees you too." That's when the camera footage started glitching. Security tried to scrub back the timeline, but every feed near the vending machine cut out from exactly 3:06 to 3:18 a.m. And during that blackout window, every snack in the machine turned black inside its wrapper. Still sealed, still shiny on the outside, but twisted within. Someone tried to open one, said the contents moved. Something about the texture being wrong, too soft, like spoiled meat soaked in oil. It left a smell on their hands that wouldn't come off. A sweet, coppery rot. They called out sick the next day. Never came back. By the end of the week, 5 staff had quit. One claimed she kept hearing the vending machine whisper her name from across the room. Another said she saw a hand inside it, just behind the glass, curled and waiting. It wasn't until maintenance tried to unplug the unit that they realized it had no power source. No cord, no outlet. It was just there, standing in the corner of a hallway that no longer appeared on blueprints. That's when the paranoia began. People started checking their pockets and finding unfamiliar receipts. each stamped with a time between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. and the words, "Item accepted." No one remembered buying anything. No one remembered asking for anything. But more and more unwrapped items kept showing up in drawers, lockers, even glove compartments. Some staff reported blackouts, short ones, 10, maybe 15 minutes at a time. But during those periods, the machine always beeped, always dispensed, always left something behind. One night, a supervisor disappeared completely. His last known location? Standing in front of the machine, staring into the glass. He was seen at 3:04 a.m. on a side hallway camera. But when security reached that wing at 3:10, he was gone. No trace, no sound, just a note resting inside the tray. He wanted more. HR eventually sealed off the hallway, claimed the vending machine had been removed, claimed it was never there. But photos still surface, blurry shots taken through cracks in the wall or between boxes in storage rooms. Each one showing the machine always with something new in the tray, always with that faint, sickly glow from behind the glass. The deeper meaning here isn't just a cursed machine. This transactional horror, the idea that something is always watching, always waiting to make a deal. And in the middle of the night, when your body is tired and your judgment's weak, it offers you what you think you want, but always takes more in return. The object from the machine isn't just not food, it's bait. It feeds on curiosity, on boredom, on the human need for answers. By the end of the month, only 2 people from that original shift team were still working. Neither speak much anymore. One of them was seen standing by a different vending machine on another site, just watching, waiting. The lights flickered as he walked away. And when someone else tried to use that machine the next day, they got a note, folded perfectly, yellowed at the corners. Do not eat what comes next. It was the 3rd week of my night shift at a small convenience store that barely saw any customers after midnight. At first, the monotony was comforting. Just the faint hum of the fridges, the flickering of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional ringing of the register. It was predictable, calm, and perfect for someone like me who didn't want to deal with people. The only company I had during those late hours was Rick, an older guy who had been there for years. He was always in the back of the store, cleaning the stockroom or sorting through outdated products. Rick was quiet, but he knew everything about the place, even the little quirks the store had. I'd often catch him talking to himself, muttering about past shifts, lost stock, or strange noises. I chalked it up to being a little eccentric. He'd been working there longer than anyone else. One night, around 2:30 a.m., the usual stillness of the store was interrupted by a loud thud. Came from the back where Rick had been working. I didn't think much of it, probably just some boxes falling over. But when I checked the security cameras, I saw something strange. The footage from the back room showed Rick standing motionless, staring at a blank wall, his hand hovering above his head as if frozen in place. The static buzz from the camera almost drowned out the faint sound of him murmuring, his voice barely audible. I shrugged and turned away, not wanting to waste time on something that might just be a glitch. But then, I noticed something even more unsettling. When I glanced back at the schedule board by the office door, Rick's name was gone. It was like it had been erased, vanished without a trace. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, his name was just gone. I quickly checked the employee schedule on the computer, hoping it was some sort of mistake. But his name wasn't there either. Not only that, but the entire week had been wiped clean, as if it had never been filled in. "Hey, Rick," I called out, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "Where's your name? You're not on the schedule anymore." He didn't respond at first. I walked over to the stockroom, calling his name again. "Rick, I said a little louder this time. He was still standing there, in that same strange position, like he hadn't even heard me. "Rick, you good?" I asked, stepping closer. Finally, he turned to face me, his eyes wide but vacant. There was something off about his expression, a hollow look that seemed to pierce through me. "My name's not on the schedule," I said, trying to get a reaction. "Why?" Rick didn't seem to process the question right away. Then, slowly, his lips parted. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "I'm always here. You just don't notice." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It was as though his words didn't match the tone of his voice. They were calm, almost rehearsed. I glanced back toward the office, my heart racing, the name on the schedule still missing. "Are you sure you're all right?" I asked again, a bit more urgently. Rick looked past me, as if distracted by something behind me. His head tilted slightly, and he mumbled under his breath, "It won't be long now." Suddenly, the store's overhead lights flickered. I couldn't help but look up, feeling a surge of panic flood my chest. The lights had been flickering on and off for a few weeks now, but it never felt this intense. It was like the store itself was losing power, but the lights were still struggling to stay on, like they were fighting some unseen force. "Rick," I said, my voice now trembling. "What do you mean?" His eyes were fixed on something over my shoulder, but when I turned, there was nothing there, just the aisle of snack foods. He spoke again, but his voice was far quieter, almost a whisper, like he was speaking to himself. "You'll see soon enough. It'll all make sense when you're ready." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just an odd behavior. It was as if Rick knew something I didn't. It was like he wasn't even fully present, like he was in two places at once, both here and somewhere else. It was then that I noticed something worse. He hadn't moved since I'd called his name. He was standing there, almost as if he'd been paused, frozen in time. I had to look away. The sensation of being watched by someone who wasn't really there made me dizzy. I rushed back to the schedule board. It was still the same. Rick's name was missing, and the other names on the list, my own included, looked oddly too clean, as if they hadn't been touched in ages. The dates had blurred, and I couldn't make sense of them anymore. The more I stared, the more the room seemed to warp, like time itself was distorting. When I looked back at Rick, he was still standing in the same spot, but now he was smiling. His lips curled into a slow, unnatural grin that didn't match the vacant look in his eyes. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said, his voice now soft, almost apologetic. "But neither are you." I backed away, the hairs on my neck standing up. It was at that moment I realized something truly horrifying. Rick wasn't the one out of place. I was the one who was trapped in this never-ending loop, forced to relive this night over and over, with no escape. I had to leave. I ran for the exit, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked, but it had never been locked before. Then, the lights flickered again, and the whole store seemed to pause, like it was waiting. A soft voice echoed from the stockroom, faint and distant, as if carried by the wind. "You'll be on the schedule soon. Just wait. All in good time." I tried to force the door open, but it was no use. The store had swallowed me whole. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick, choking me. In the dim light of the back room, Rick's form was gone. Only his name remained on the schedule, slowly filling in as if it had always been there. I don't know how much time passed. I don't even know if it's still the same night. But when I finally looked back at the schedule, my name was there, and I could feel it. Soon someone else would show up and they'd see it too, and they'd know. The shift never ends. It was always the same at 3 a.m. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint scent of stale coffee, and the ticking of the old clock on the wall, all merged together into the monotony of another long shift. Jessica had worked at the local convenience store for 6 months now. After midnight, the place was dead quiet, save for the occasional car passing by outside or the distant sound of a truck unloading at the warehouse across the street. It was her routine, something that had settled into her bones like a comfortable chill. But tonight was different. The first time the alarm went off, she thought it was a glitch. Just a false alarm, some freak technical error. It happens sometimes. But then, it went off again. Louder this time, as though something inside the walls was trying to make itself heard. Jessica glanced at the clock.
3:01 nachts.
Her shift was almost over. She was alone, and there was no one to reset the alarm except her. That was the only reason she kept the alarm system engaged when she closed up. She didn't want to be held responsible if something went wrong. The blinking red light above the door signaled an intrusion, security breach. She hesitated. The door was locked, the windows too. She had checked them not long ago, and there was no one outside. The alarm shouldn't be going off. Her eyes darted toward the monitors on the counter, expecting to see something, anything, that could explain the noise. But all the screens were blank. Static, the kind that sometimes followed a flicker in the power, but nothing more. Then she heard it. Footsteps, soft and muffled, as if someone was pacing just outside the door. No one. The door was solid, metal, and there was no one out there. Jessica stood up, cautiously moving toward the door. Her mind raced. Had someone triggered the alarm somehow? Maybe a bird or a stray animal had set it off. Or maybe it was a prank. Some teenagers trying to mess with her. But the closer she got to the door, the more the air felt thick. Something wasn't right. When she reached for the door handle, the alarm ceased. Dead silence followed. The kind of silence that pressed in from all sides, making her skin crawl. She turned the handle. Locked. She checked the control panel above the door. Security system engaged. The red light still flashed, indicating an issue, but everything appeared in order. It didn't make sense. Why would the alarm go off if the door was locked and secure? The store was completely still again, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Jessica tried to convince herself that it was just another glitch, a malfunction. But she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise, the sensation of being watched creeping over her like a cold shiver. Her heart rate quickened. She stepped back from the door and returned to the counter, reaching for her phone. But before her fingers could touch the screen, the alarm went off again. This time, a harsh, shrill sound that reverberated through the walls and into her chest. It was as though the alarm was trying to scream through the walls themselves. Jessica froze, looking at the monitors again, but still nothing. There was no movement. The windows were clear, and no one was near the door. She wanted to call someone, but she didn't know who. The store was small, and she didn't have the number for the owner. He'd told her never to call him unless it was an emergency. Was this an emergency? The door shook. A sudden, violent rattle made Jessica jump back from the counter. It wasn't the wind. There was no breeze in the store, no storm brewing outside. The door rattled again, and then, with a metallic groan, something pushed against it. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Something was pressing against the door. Something heavy, something human. But the door didn't open. Couldn't. She had locked it. She checked the handle again. Locked, just like it had been a minute ago. But the pressure against the door was undeniable. Someone or something was trying to get in. She could feel the weight of it, could hear the faint scratching, the sound of fingers pressing against the wood as though trying to pry it open. Her thoughts raced. Should she call the police? Should she hide? But hiding would do no good. She couldn't escape if the door opened. She couldn't outrun whatever was trying to get inside. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, her mind locked in place as the pressure against the door grew. She stepped back, moving slowly, cautiously toward the small office in the back of the store, where there was a phone with a direct line to the police. As she moved, the door rattled again, louder this time, and the sound of nails scraping against the metal sent an icy chill down her spine. Then, in the midst of all this, she saw something. A figure reflected in the glass of the door. A shadow, dark and distorted, standing just outside. Her breath hitched, and she nearly stumbled backward. But it was wrong. The figure wasn't moving in sync with the rattle of the door. It was just standing there, as if waiting. Jessica froze. Could she see it clearly? No. The shadow was too indistinct, too unnatural. It flickered like a bad TV signal. Just as she moved closer, it disappeared. The rattle stopped. For a long, suffocating moment, everything was still again. The alarm was silent. The figure was gone. The store seemed to breathe with her, each second stretching longer than the last. Jessica dared to look outside again, but saw only the empty parking lot, bathed in the cold light of the street lamp. No one in sight. She walked back to the door, confused and trembling. Everything had gone quiet. Too quiet. She checked the lock again. Still locked. Her pulse raced as she slowly turned the handle. This time it opened with ease. The door creaked in protest, as if it had been holding back for too long. But when she stepped out, the parking lot was empty. The air felt wrong, like the world around her had suddenly shifted, becoming thinner and more fragile. She stood there, a sense of dread washing over her, as if the very ground beneath her feet was unstable. She stepped back inside, the door closing softly behind her. And the alarm? It had stopped, just like that. For a moment, she felt like everything had returned to normal. But when she checked the security monitors again, there it was, clear as day. Someone standing in the corner of the store, staring into the camera. The door never opened, yet something had entered. It was 2:30 a.m. when the intercom crackled to life. The store was empty save for me, alone on the night shift. A dull hum filled the air from the overhead lights, and the steady beeping of the freezer door every few seconds was the only other sound. The usual humdrum of empty hours was always eerily quiet, but I'd gotten used to it. The store was small, tucked away on a deserted street corner in the outskirts of town. We closed at midnight, so by the time I clocked in, the place was silent. My shift had started off like any other, with me sorting through the inventory and checking the shelves for any misplaced items. My manager had left for the night, and the other workers had all gone home. The only sound was the low, steady whir of the air conditioning. And then came the intercom. The first static burst made me jump, the sudden noise breaking the silence. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the buzzing speaker above me. "Hello!" The voice crackled again, this time clearer, almost too clear. "Is anyone there?" I hesitated. It was strange. No one should have been in the store at this hour. I looked around, half expecting to see a prankster standing in the aisles with a walkie-talkie. But there was nothing. I grabbed the intercom mic with shaky hands and pressed the button. Yeah. Hello? Who is this?" My voice was thick with confusion, and the static crackled in response. "Can you hear me?" The voice repeated, more insistent this time. "I've been waiting for someone to answer." I scanned the store again. No customers. The front door was locked, the security system was active, and the only people who had access were myself and the manager. But still, this voice. It wasn't my manager's voice. It wasn't anyone I recognized. "Who is this?" I pressed again, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause before the voice responded. Now slower, more deliberate. I've been waiting. For you. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the way the words were delivered felt wrong. Like it was meant to be something comforting but was instead suffocating. Like something was hidden between the lines. Something I wasn't meant to understand. Who are you? I asked more forcefully this time. This is the intercom. You're not supposed to be. The voice cut me off, and the tone changed suddenly. It wasn't frantic or impatient anymore. Instead, it sounded eerily calm. I know where you are. I froze. It wasn't just what the voice said. It was the way it said it. There was no emotion, no desperation. It was like the speaker knew something I didn't. Something about the store, something about me. I looked over at the security monitors mounted in the corner, scanning each camera feed. Empty aisles. Shelves stacked neatly. Nothing out of place. But that voice, it didn't sound far away. It sounded too close. Please, just tell me who you are. I demanded, my heart pounding now. I'm alone here. You need to stop. But the voice didn't stop. Continued, like it was ignoring my words entirely. You don't need to ask. I've seen you watching. It was then that a cold realization crawled up my spine, creeping under my skin. I hadn't been watching. I had been busy with the inventory, and the store was empty. But somehow it was as though this voice had been observing me. How could it know I was alone? I rushed to the security monitors again, flipping through each camera feed. The back room, the aisles, the parking lot, the front door, all empty. But the feeling of being watched was intensifying, creeping in around me like a fog. I couldn't shake the sensation that there was someone in the store, nearby. You're not alone, the voice whispered suddenly, much softer this time. I'm right behind you. I spun around, my eyes darting across the darkened aisles. But the store was still empty. My pulse raced, my breathing shallow. Who is this? I shouted into the intercom again, desperate, my fingers slick with sweat as they clutched the mic. No answer, just the same eerie silence that stretched on forever, suffocating everything. And then the words came again, slow and deliberate. I'm waiting for you to look behind you. I stood there, paralyzed for what felt like an eternity. Should I turn around? Was it a prank? Was someone playing with me from behind the shelves? Or was this some kind of sick joke? A glitch in the system? I swallowed hard, my hand trembling as I slowly turned to face the far aisle, my heart hammering in my chest. There, in the distance, at the end of the aisle, I could see something, a shadow, but it wasn't moving. It was just standing there. I didn't know how long I stared at it. Seconds? Minutes? Time had slowed to a crawl, and I couldn't look away. The shadow was tall, unnaturally so, and it seemed to blend into the dark corners of the store like it was part of the walls themselves. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but my body wouldn't respond. And then, just as I was about to make a break for it, the voice spoke again, its tone low and almost satisfied. You looked. The intercom went silent. I didn't move, couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of stone, and the shadow seemed to shift ever so slightly. But when I finally forced myself to turn away, to head toward the exit, the lights flickered above me. And when they came back on, there was no shadow. The store was empty. I ran to the door, my breath sharp and ragged, my hands fumbling to unlock it. I checked the security monitors again, only to see the camera feed glitching. A static buzz filled the screen. For a split second, I thought I saw a face, right in front of the camera. And then it was gone. I bolted out of the store, my heart pounding in my chest as I slammed the door behind me. But when I checked the schedule for the next shift, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The intercom system had been listed under maintenance for the past 3 days. It wasn't supposed to be working, and yet it answered me, and somehow I knew the voice was still waiting. The store was always quiet at night. For years, Lisa had worked the closing shift at the antique store, nestled in the corner of a sleepy town. The creaking wooden floor, the faint scent of dust and old leather, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, everything about the place felt trapped in another time. It was the perfect kind of store for people who didn't mind being alone. Lisa didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it. The silence gave her space to think, to reflect. But over the past few weeks, something had been shifting. Something subtle, something she couldn't put her finger on, yet it was undeniable. It was the mannequins. The store had a peculiar collection of them, old, lifelike mannequins dressed in clothing from different eras. Some wore tattered dresses, while others were dressed in suits. All of them seemed to have a story of their own, and each night as Lisa moved past them, she couldn't help but feel like they were watching her. She often joked to herself that it was silly, that they were just lifeless figures. But as the days went on, the feeling grew. It started one evening when she'd finished her rounds and was about to close the front door for the night. She noticed something odd. A mannequin, one that hadn't been there earlier in the day, was now positioned by the back window. It was one of the older ones, the one with the cracked porcelain face. The mannequin's head tilted slightly, as though it had been moved. She thought she had misremembered where it was placed, or perhaps one of the other staff had shifted it. But it felt off. The next night, it was the same mannequin again. This time, it was closer to the front of the store, standing near the entrance. Lisa frowned. There was no way the mannequin could have moved on its own. But still, she tried to brush it off. Just a mistake. Perhaps she'd moved it earlier without realizing. But as she glanced at it, her heart rate quickened. The mannequin's arm was slightly outstretched, almost as though it was reaching toward her. Night after night, the mannequins in the store seemed to grow more erratic in their positioning. Lisa was certain she had placed them in the same spots each day, at least she thought she had. Yet, every time she turned her back, they seemed to inch closer. At first, it was small, barely perceptible changes. A slight shift of the head, a tilt of the shoulder. But then it became more deliberate. One of the mannequins, a tall figure wearing a black dress, was now standing near the back office, looking directly at her. The most disturbing part? Its feet were no longer firmly planted on the ground. It appeared to be taking a step. Lisa started to wonder if she was losing her mind. She had worked here for years, and never had she experienced anything like this. She knew she hadn't moved them, but then why did it feel as though they were slowly closing in on her? One night, after locking the front door and preparing for the usual round of chores, Lisa decided to stay late. She hadn't fully examined the mannequins in the back of the store. Maybe there was something she'd missed, some mechanical flaw in them that caused the odd movements. She needed answers. The dim light of the back room illuminated the row of mannequins, standing like silent sentinels, their empty eyes reflecting the weak glow. She moved toward the farthest row, the one with the black-dressed mannequin. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't in the same position as before. It had moved again, but this time, its hand was outstretched, palm open, as if inviting her to touch it. Lisa swallowed hard. The shop had always been cold at night, but now a chill ran down her spine. Stepping closer, Lisa felt the urge to back away, but something held her there. Was it fear, or was it curiosity? She had to know. Reaching out, she touched the cold, porcelain hand. Felt wrong. It was too cold, too real. Her fingers brushed against something sharp, a crack in the surface. When she pulled her hand back, a jagged shard of porcelain stuck to her skin. Blood trickled down her wrist, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes locked onto the mannequin's face. The cracks that marred its expression seemed to twist, as though they were deepening. The store felt quieter than ever. The hum of the ceiling fan was absent now, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat in the silence. And then she heard it, faint but clear, a soft scraping sound. Lisa's head snapped to the side, but she saw nothing. The mannequins were exactly where they had been, only something felt different. The scraping noise grew louder. It was coming from behind her. Her eyes widened, and her breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to turn around. She knew what it was. The mannequins, one by one, had started to move. The black-dressed figure that had been outstretched, its hand reaching toward her, was now standing directly behind her. She could feel it. It wasn't just her imagination. It was there, a presence in the air. And then she heard the faintest whisper, like the wind brushing against the window. "Don't leave." Lisa's legs were frozen. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. Her hands gripped the counter in front of her, knuckles turning white. The mannequins were not just standing anymore. They were shifting, inching closer. The one closest to the door, its once blank stare now fixed on Lisa, was moving its foot, taking slow steps forward. Then something changed. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as the black-dressed mannequin, the one that had moved toward her earlier, let out a low, rasping sound. It was breathing. "Stay!" A cold rush of panic flooded Lisa's chest. She turned, almost stumbling, and ran for the front door. The air felt thick. The mannequins, they were no longer stationary. She could hear them, all of them, shifting, creaking, the sound of their movements eerily in sync. She wasn't alone. They were closing in. And now they were no longer mannequins. They were something else entirely. Her fingers fumbled for the door handle. She pulled. It was locked. Panic surged through her. She slammed her body against the door, trying to break free. The scraping noises came closer, closer. She turned toward the mannequins. They were standing together now, a crowd of hollow faces staring at her, inches from her skin. Lisa reached for the phone, dialing for help, but when she lifted the receiver to her ear, all she heard was static. Then the whisper returned. It came from all around her. The mannequins were speaking, but their mouths didn't move. "Stay with us." The store was no longer just a place. It had become a trap, and she wasn't sure if she had ever really left, or if she was now a part of their collection. It had been 6 months since I started working the night shift at the small, run-down convenience store on the outskirts of town. The pay wasn't great, but the quiet, peaceful isolation suited me. No one bothered me. The only noise came from the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above and the distant growls of traffic, which barely touched the store's worn-down walls. It was the perfect place for someone who didn't like people. I'd get in around 10 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m., making sure the store was locked up tight each night. My manager, a quiet guy named Brad, would stop by around 5 a.m. to make sure everything was running smoothly. He never stayed long. Just a few quick checks, maybe a short conversation about something mundane, and then he'd be gone before I could even get too comfortable. But then it started. It wasn't anything overt at first, just little things that left me unsettled. The first time I thought it was a fluke. I clocked in at 10 p.m., same as usual, but when I checked the time clock to see the last clock out, I noticed something strange. The clock read 9:53 p.m. I had been the only one there when I arrived. Brad wasn't due in for another hour. I brushed it off. Maybe it was just an error. But the next night, it happened again. I walked in at 10 p.m., and as soon as I got to the time clock, I noticed the same thing. Someone had clocked out just minutes before I arrived. I was alone. The only other person with access to the store at night was Brad. And even then, his shifts didn't start until later. I told myself it didn't matter. I was probably just tired, overthinking things. But then it started to get weirder. Every single night, I would clock in at 10 p.m., and the same thing would happen. Someone else had clocked out before me. I'd see their name, just a blurry, indistinct line on the screen. It was never Brad's name. It wasn't anyone else I recognized. But every morning, I'd check the time clock at 6 a.m., and every time, their name would pop up as having clocked out just minutes before I arrived. It didn't make sense. At first, I thought maybe the time clock was malfunctioning, or maybe someone else had access to the store. But as the days wore on, the unease in my chest grew. I started to feel it, that feeling, like I wasn't alone, like something or someone was watching me. The store, which had once felt like my sanctuary, felt oppressive now. I started to notice small things. The sound of footsteps behind me when I was certain I was alone. The rustling of papers, even though I was the only one working. The faint click of the back door, like someone was trying to get in without me noticing. I checked the locks obsessively, but they were always secure. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the time clock anymore. It was everything. I began to ask Brad about the shifts. Maybe someone was getting in after hours, but he always brushed it off, telling me it was probably just my imagination. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. I started working harder, staying more alert. I'd even set up cameras in the back room to catch anything strange. But every time I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. Just me alone. Then one night it happened. I walked in as usual at 10 p.m. The time clock read 9:52 p.m. again, but this time something was different. As I stood there, staring at the clock, I heard it, the faintest shuffle of footsteps behind me. I froze. My heart raced. Slowly, I turned around. There was no one there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted around the store, but it was empty, just as it always was. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of presence. The air felt heavier. I tried to push it out of my mind. Focus on work. Stay busy, I told myself, but the feeling never left. The next morning, after the shift ended at 6 a.m., I checked the clock again. Same thing. Someone had clocked out at 9:55 p.m. I had been in the store for the past 8 hours, alone. Yet, every morning it was like someone else had been there first. The unease in my chest was growing, gnawing at me, like a splinter lodged deep within my ribs. I began to feel paranoid. Was someone sneaking in during the night? Someone I couldn't see? Someone who didn't show up on the cameras? The final straw came one night when I decided to confront whatever was going on. I stayed later than usual, past my scheduled shift, hoping to catch whoever was responsible. I sat behind the counter, watching the clock tick closer to 6 a.m. I stared at it, waiting for that familiar name to pop up. The name of the person who had been clocking out before me every single night. 5:58 a.m. 5:59 a.m. 6 a.m. The clock turned over. I leaned forward, my pulse hammering in my chest. The name appeared, but this time it was different. The name wasn't just a blur anymore. It was my name, my full name. I had just clocked out. My heart stopped. I looked around the store empty, but then a movement caught my eye. I turned slowly, my blood running cold. There, standing at the back of the store, was a figure, a shadow. It looked like me, but it wasn't, couldn't be. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I was frozen. My mind raced. Had I really seen myself? The store was silent again. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had been watching me. Something had been there in the store every single night. I couldn't leave fast enough. I grabbed my things, locked up, and rushed out the door. But when I came in the next night, the time clock read 9:52 p.m. once again, and someone else, me, had clocked out. It was the usual graveyard shift at the small convenience store, a shift that almost felt like a formality. The same familiar faces, or rather, the same few faces, came in, grabbed their essentials, and left without much of a word. Tonight, however, was different. There was a weird undercurrent in the air, something almost unexplainable. It started when Sarah, the cashier, noticed something strange about the store's register screen. The clock on the wall ticked its usual rhythm, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time itself was moving too slowly. It was 3:03 a.m. The store had been quiet for the last hour, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of paper behind the counter. A few scattered customers had come and gone, most just grabbing snacks or drinks. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something felt off. Then it happened. The register screen flashed as if rebooting, but there was no actual power flicker. Sarah frowned, looking at the display, which was now showing an item, a bag of chips. Not any chips. Her mind was a bit too tired to process the full details, but it was the same bag she'd seen dozens of times before. It wasn't a new order, nor was it something she could recognize from a previous sale. The screen wasn't showing any customer name either, just a lonely item. A solitary bag of chips, priced and ready to be processed. She clicked the cancel button, but the screen didn't change. Stayed stuck as though frozen in time. Okay, weird, she muttered, rubbing her eyes. She knew the system was old, but this was something else. The weird thing was the display didn't just freeze. It was now stuck on the same item, the same bag of chips again and again, cycling through at intervals of about 5 seconds. A glitch? Maybe, but Sarah had never seen anything like this. She stood there, staring, her fingers hovering over the register keys. It was 3:04 a.m. The door chimed. A man in a long coat entered, his features partially obscured by the shadows. His pace was slow, deliberate, like someone who had all the time in the world. His footsteps echoed unervingly in the otherwise silent store. Sarah snapped her attention away from the register screen. Her gaze met his, and he gave her a small nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft for the time of night. "Hey," Sarah replied, trying to mask the unease growing in her chest. He walked past the aisles, and Sarah's attention reluctantly returned to the register screen. The chips were still there, but now they had multiplied. More bags had appeared, filling up the screen in rapid succession. It wasn't just one anymore. It was an entire row, repeating on a loop. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached to press the cancel button again. But this time, her hand froze in place. Something inside her told her not to. Instead, she stared at the screen, the bags of chips multiplying, stacking up one after the other, until it seemed like the entire screen was filled with nothing but chips, bags upon bags. She blinked, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something move in the corner of the display. A shadow, just a flicker, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. A soft thud echoed from behind her. Sarah turned, her pulse quickening. The man from earlier had reached the counter, a bag of chips in his hand. He placed them down silently. His eyes didn't meet hers, only stared down at the counter, as though waiting. "Is that it for you?" she asked, her voice more shaky than she intended. He nodded slowly. "Yes, just these." Without thinking, She scanned the bag of chips, the register screen lighting up. She didn't have time to look away from it. The same bag of chips. The same exact chips she'd seen cycling on the register screen. The price was the same, the brand was the same. Even the design on the bag, everything about it was identical. She hesitated, but something compelled her to finish the transaction. It was routine. The beep of the scanner was followed by the soft tap of the register drawer opening, and she handed the man his change. He took it, but didn't say a word, just turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back to her, his face partially obscured by the doorframe. "I'll be back," he said, his tone almost matter-of-fact. Sarah stared at the empty space where he had stood, her hands cold against the counter. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just witnessed something wrong. Her gaze drifted back to the register screen. The bag of chips had returned. The same one over and over again, repeating. Her heart skipped a beat.
3:05 nachts.
A few minutes passed, and Sarah tried to shake it off. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. "Just a glitch. A glitch." But the clock ticked on. Her mind kept flashing back to the man's words. "I'll be back." Then the door chimed again. It was him, the same man. This time he wasn't holding anything. He walked up to the counter, and just like before, he set a bag of chips down. The same exact bag. The same one that had been repeatedly flashing on the register screen. Sarah's breath hitched. She glanced at the register, the loop still continuing, but this time the chips were multiplied tenfold. Every time she blinked, more and more bags appeared, piling up until the screen was consumed with them. She stared at him. "I just rang you up," she said, her voice trembling. "You just bought this." The man's smile was slow, too slow. "Did I?" Sarah swallowed hard. The air around her felt thick now, suffocating, like the walls were closing in. The man didn't answer her. He simply took his chips and walked out, just like the first time. The door closed behind him. The shop was quiet again, but Sarah's eyes stayed locked on the register. The screen was still cycling through the bags, each one appearing and disappearing in an endless loop. The door chimed. Again. The same man. Again. And again. And again. Each time he bought the same chips. Sarah's hands shook violently as she slammed her palm onto the cancel button. But the screen wouldn't stop, kept flashing the same chips, the same man, over and over. She wasn't sure how long it had been. Minutes? Hours? Time had blurred, and yet it felt like no time had passed at all.
3:08 nachts.
Then something changed. The man didn't just place a bag of chips on the counter. He placed two, no longer just one. The screen still showed the same single bag of chips, repeating in its cursed cycle. But the man didn't leave this time. His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "You can't stop it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the store. "You'll never stop it." His words echoed in her mind, and the screen kept flashing. The chips kept coming, and the night continued. There's a certain stillness in the air at 2:34 a.m., the kind of silence that feels thick, almost suffocating. You'd think after a few months, I'd be used to it by now, but I'm not. I don't think I ever will be. I work the night shift at a small convenience store. It's the only job I could find after moving to this quiet town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and time seems to slow down just enough to make the long hours feel even longer. Most nights, I'm alone, except for the occasional drunk or late-night shopper who stumbles in to grab something before heading home. Tonight's no different. It's just me, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the hum of the freezer in the back. I can hear it, the hum. It never stops, even when the lights go out. Started about 2 weeks ago. At first, I thought it was just a fluke. The lights flickered, and I assumed it was a problem with the circuit. But then, it happened again, and again, and again. I've tried everything. I checked the wiring, fiddled with the fuse box, even called the landlord. But the lights keep flickering, like a broken heartbeat that never quite stops. And every time it happens, I swear I can feel something in the dark. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Late nights, lack of sleep, maybe even stress. But it didn't stop. Tonight, I'm stocking the shelves when it happens again. The lights flicker and die. But this time, something's different. It's darker than usual, much darker. For a moment, I just stand there, staring at the aisles in complete blackness, the hum of the freezer still buzzing in the background. I reach up to turn the flashlight on my phone, and that's when I hear it. Soft at first, like the shuffle of footsteps across the linoleum floor. But it's too quiet for someone to be walking around. I freeze, the phone trembling in my hand. I shouldn't be scared. It's just my imagination, right? That's what I tell myself. But the sound doesn't stop. It gets louder, closer. My pulse quickens, my breath shallow as I try to listen, to focus. It's almost like someone's breathing, a shallow, labored inhale just on the other side of the counter. I turn around quickly, but there's no one there. The lights flicker again. This time, I don't look away. I keep my eyes fixed on the ceiling, watching the fluorescent tubes blink, struggling to stay on. Then, they go out completely. The hum of the freezer is gone. Everything's still, silent. I can feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest now. I'm not alone in here. I'm sure of it. I wait a few seconds, trying to steady my nerves. Then I shine the flashlight around. The beam of light cuts through the dark, but it feels weak, almost like it's being swallowed by the blackness. My hands are shaking as I check every corner of the store, every shelf, every aisle. There's nothing, but something feels wrong. The air is too thick. Feels like I'm being watched. I force myself to breathe. Just a power outage. That's all it is. It happens all the time in old buildings like this. I look down at my phone, the light flickering as if it's struggling against the dark. I press the button to check the time, 2:39 a.m. Just 5 minutes since the last flicker. Then I hear it again. The sound. The soft, shuffling footsteps. But this time, it's coming from the back. The stockroom. I know that sound. I've been working here long enough to know when someone's walking in the aisles. But this is different. This is too soft, too deliberate. I take a step toward the back room. I don't know why I should just leave, but something keeps pulling me forward, like an invisible thread tugging me into the dark. I reach the stockroom door. The store is eerily quiet now, as if everything is holding its breath. I grab the door handle, but before I can twist it, the lights flicker once more, then come back on. The hum of the freezer returns. The aisles are bathed in that harsh fluorescent light, but there's no one there. Nothing out of place. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's real anymore. I step inside the stockroom, my feet barely making a sound on the cold tile. There's nothing there either. No one. No strange figures hiding in the shadows. Just rows and rows of shelves, boxes of stock, and the faint smell of stale air. But as I turn to leave, I catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. It's a shadow creeping across the floor, moving just out of sight, like someone or something sliding along the wall. I whip around to face it, but the shadow's already gone. I'm not imagining this. I rush back to the front, but before I can reach the counter, the lights flicker again. And this time, when they come back on, I see it. In the reflection of the glass door, I see myself. But it's not me. Not really. The reflection is distorted, twisted, almost like a broken mirror. My figure looks wrong. I'm standing there, but I'm not moving. My reflection is staring at me, unmoving, with dark eyes that don't belong to me. I stumble back, heart hammering in my chest. The lights flicker again 1, 2, 3 times, and when they stabilize, I'm alone again. I run outside, gasping for air. My phone reads 2:45 a.m. It's too quiet now, like the whole world is holding its breath. I don't know how much longer I can stay here, but every time I look away, the power goes out. The first night it happened, Thomas shrugged it off as nothing more than a glitch, a mistake. He had been working the night shift at the old, decrepit building on Maple Street for nearly a month now, and if he'd learned anything about this place, it was to ignore the little oddities that crept into his otherwise mundane routine. The radio crackled to life at precisely 2:13 a.m. All we can do now is wait. It wasn't unusual to hear static on the old radios that dotted the storage rooms and hallways. They were relics, decorative pieces from the building's earlier days when it was a thriving business, not the empty, forgotten shell it was now. But this was different. This wasn't just a random noise or the hum of an aging speaker. The voice that emerged was distorted, fragmented, but undeniably human. At first, Thomas thought it was just his mind playing tricks. He was tired, after all. The night shift had a way of warping time, making the walls feel as though they were pressing in on him. The building felt alive, and not in a welcoming way. It was like it had been waiting for him, waiting for someone who would stay long enough to hear its whispers. Can you hear it? The sound. It's closer now. The voice crackled again. He glanced around. No one else was here. No one else ever came down this far into the building at night, and even if they did, none of the radios were turned on. It wasn't until his gaze landed on the wall near the radio, its peeling paint and cracked surface, that he realized something was wrong. The wall, just behind the speaker, was trembling ever so slightly. The radio cut off with a loud pop. The room fell into an eerie silence. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, trying to push away the creeping sensation that something wasn't right. He leaned closer to the radio and adjusted the dial. A sharp crackle responded, and then, just as he had begun to turn it off, a voice, unmistakably clearer this time, hissed from the speaker. "Don't open it. They'll find you." His breath caught in his throat. A shiver ran down his spine as the static grew louder, louder, until it became unbearable. The lights above flickered once, then twice, before settling into an unsettling hum. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Who was this, and why was it coming through the walls? As the voice continued, the words blurred into a garbled mess. But one thing stood out above the rest, faint but clear. It's in the walls, still, hidden, always. He pulled his hand away from the radio, looking at the wall with growing unease. He had to tell someone. He had to get out of here. This was insane. But as his eyes wandered, the once quiet hum of the air conditioning, the ticking of the clock, the faint echo of his own breathing, all of it seemed to fade. He wasn't sure if he was hearing things, or if the building was swallowing up the world outside. Before he could even turn toward the door, the radio screeched. It was so loud that it felt like his teeth were vibrating. 2:13. Remember the time. Remember the time. The voice, now more frantic, cut through the static like a knife. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. The clock on the wall, which he hadn't noticed before, read exactly 2:13. His gaze snapped back to the radio, and the static cleared enough for him to hear it. The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the walls, from everywhere. "Stop. You can't leave. You won't leave." He slammed the radio off, feeling the thud of his pulse in his ears. He had to get out. It didn't make sense, but he didn't care. The whispers were everywhere now. The walls were alive with sound, vibrating with each fragmented word. They were getting closer, or perhaps he was getting closer to them. The air in the room thickened. A low hum resonated from beneath the floorboards, so deep that it felt like it was shaking his chest. He backed away, eyes darting around the dark room. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. What was he hearing? Was he going crazy? Was this some kind of joke? But then, from behind him, he heard it. A voice, soft and haunting, almost a whisper, coming from a place that couldn't exist. You've heard it. It's too late. The station is here. The broadcast never ends. Thomas froze, his back pressed against the far wall, his breath shallow. The voice, so close now, sounded like it was right beside him, but when he spun around, there was no one there. Only the trembling walls, the peeling paint, and the creaking sounds of an old building settling. He wanted to scream, but the fear had stolen his voice. He wanted to run, but the walls were closing in. And then, from nowhere, the radio crackled back to life, the same voice flooding the space with its eerie tone. You'll be part of the broadcast now. Just wait for the time. 2:13. Always 2:13. A thud echoed from the floor beneath him. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer, until it was right underneath him. The air was thick now, suffocating, and the walls were moving. The static from the radio twisted and warped into something almost musical, a distorted melody that seemed to crawl under his skin. Thomas turned to flee, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. The walls pressed in on him, the sound of the radio pounding in his ears, his heart racing with panic. The clock ticked. 2:13. It was still 2:13. The whispers swelled, now a cacophony of voices. They were everywhere. The radio, the walls, the air, and they all spoke the same words. You're part of the broadcast. Forever. Suddenly, the door swung open, and the hallway outside seemed to stretch into infinity. But as Thomas stepped into the corridor, the walls behind him seemed to close off, the building shifting, the radio still blaring from somewhere deep inside. The time would always be 2:13, and it was only a matter of time before he would hear the broadcast again. I was working the night shift at the old office building on Broad Street, a quiet, mostly abandoned structure, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzzed in the hallways, and the elevators always seemed to take just a little too long to arrive. There was only one other person on the floor, an intern who worked the same hours as me. He was the only company I had, and honestly, that was fine. I preferred the solitude. It wasn't my first night, but something about this shift felt different. The hum of the air conditioning was louder than usual, almost like it was struggling to keep up with the rising tension in the building. I was seated at my desk, fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the keyboard, when the sudden thud of something falling in the hall snapped me out of my trance. I glanced around. No one else was supposed to be here. My coworker had already left for the night, and the building was supposed to be empty. I stood up, half expecting it to be a janitor or someone else who was still around for some unknown reason. But when I opened the door to the hallway, I found nothing. Just the emptiness stretching out in front of me, lit by dim, flickering lights. I checked the security monitor, expecting to see someone in the cameras, but there was no sign of anyone. The hallways were empty, and the only thing moving was a dust particle drifting lazily through the air. I shook my head, trying to clear the strange feeling growing in my chest. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. It's just the old building playing tricks. But then, I heard it again. a soft, muffled thud, coming from behind the walls. Not in the hall this time, but somewhere deep inside the building. It was as if something or someone was tapping, quietly, in the dark. The noise sent a cold shiver down my spine. I decided to investigate. I wasn't sure why, but my feet carried me toward the sound as if my legs were moving of their own accord. The hallways stretched further than I remembered, curving into unfamiliar corners I hadn't noticed before. There was a heavy, almost oppressive silence, broken only by the faintest echo of my footsteps. I followed the sound, turning left, right, then left again. The hall seemed endless, like it was slowly reshaping itself as I walked through it. The walls felt wrong, as if the space itself was too narrow, too confined, as though the building itself was squeezing me. The sound continued, a rhythmic tapping, like nails against wood. Then I reached the door. The door wasn't on the blueprint. I was sure of it. I'd walked this floor countless times, and there had never been a door in this part of the hallway. It wasn't just the door, though, it was the way it felt. Cold, warped, like something unnatural had pushed it into existence. The wood was old, weathered, and unmarked, save for a small, rusted handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I felt the pull again, this strange compulsion to open it. Without thinking, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A damp, musty stench like mildew and something else, something darker. It smelled like rot. I stepped inside, and my eyes took a moment to adjust to the dim light. There was nothing remarkable about the room, at least at first glance. It was a small, cramped space with concrete floors and walls. There was nothing in it except for a set of stairs leading down into blackness. The stairs seemed to descend forever. The air was thick with the sensation of something waiting below, something pressing against me from the dark. I tried to turn back, but I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the floor, and a heavy weight seemed to press on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The sound, that same tapping, was louder now, came from below. It was like someone was gently knocking on something made of wood, but it was too regular, too methodical. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. The pressure grew, and my hands began to shake. Without thinking, I took a step forward. I don't remember exactly how I descended the stairs, but when I reached the bottom, I felt the air change. It was colder down here, freezing, in fact. The walls were wet, and the ground was slick beneath my shoes. And then I heard it, the sound of water dripping, slowly, rhythmically, echoing around the chamber. But there was something else, too, a faint whisper. It was so soft that I thought I had imagined it at first. The words were unintelligible, just a jumble of sounds that made my skin crawl. I turned my head, trying to locate the source, but the whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It made my skin prickle with unease. And then I saw it. In the far corner there was a door. Just like the one I had found before, it wasn't on any blueprint. It wasn't supposed to be here. The rusted hinges creaked as if they were about to give way. The faintest light leaked through the cracks in the door, casting long shadows against the walls. I knew I shouldn't open it, but something inside me, the same thing that had drawn me here in the first place, urged me forward. I had to open it. I had to see what was behind it. As I reached for the door handle, the whispers grew louder. The tapping from below had stopped, replaced by a strange, unnerving silence. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in around me. I hesitated. The door creaked open with a suddenness that made my heart leap into my throat. The light beyond the door was too bright, too pure. It was blinding, and I had to squint to see anything at all. The room beyond was bare, save for a single chair placed in the center of the floor. The chair was old, its upholstery torn and faded, but it was the only thing in the room. Then, in the silence, something clicked into place in my mind. This wasn't just a room. This wasn't just a basement. It was waiting. It had been waiting for me all along. And now it had found me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. And then, from behind me, I heard it. The sound of someone breathing. Someone else was down here with me. There's a sense of dread that comes with every night shift. It's not just the silence or the isolation, but the feeling that something's off. And when you're stuck alone in the quiet hours of the night, your mind can begin to play tricks on you. I was working at a 24-hour convenience store, one of those places you forget about the moment you leave. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't anything special. But it paid the bills, and that's all I needed. The graveyard shift was always the worst. No customers, no coworkers, just me, the dull hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional noise of the automatic doors opening for no reason. That's how it had been for months. But one night, something changed. I was on my usual route, sweeping the aisles, making sure the stock was neat, checking the clocks. Nothing extraordinary. The night dragged on as usual, each minute feeling like an eternity. Then, around 3:42 a.m., I decided to take a short break. I grabbed my phone from the counter and stepped into the back room, where the small fridge and the staff room were. I hadn't seen anyone in hours, not since the last customer around 11 p.m. The store felt empty, colder than usual. I turned to face the little mirror on the wall while scrolling through my phone, mindlessly checking notifications. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but there was something wrong. The person in the mirror wasn't quite me. There was a subtle difference, something almost imperceptible, like the way an object can seem just out of focus. But the more I stared, the more I realized that the person in the mirror wasn't just slightly different. They were me, but not at the same time. My reflection smiled at me, not in a friendly way. A wide, strange grin that I had never seen before. It wasn't a reflection of me in the traditional sense, it was a version of me. I blinked. The smile vanished. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I hadn't slept well the night before. I turned around to check the room, to calm myself. No one. I was alone, like always. I looked back at the mirror, and there it was again, the smile. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. My heart beat harder. I reached up to touch my own face, feeling the coolness of my skin, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know why, but I felt a chill that wasn't just physical. My reflection in the mirror didn't move the way I did. My reflection, it moved first. I pulled my hand away from my face and quickly turned on my heels, almost stumbling back. But when I turned back to the mirror, the smile was gone. Just the usual tired me staring back. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, just the lack of sleep. But then the real horror began. I returned to the front of the store, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I went through the motions, tidying up the counter, organizing the shelves, and checking the back door. But every time I glanced into the mirror above the counter, I saw it again. The other me. It wasn't just the smile anymore. It was the eyes. Those eyes weren't mine. They were cold, distant, like someone had inhabited my body and taken it for a spin. I was aware of my own eyes. They weren't like that. But when I looked at myself in the reflection, the cold eyes of the stranger stared back, watching me with an unnerving stillness. The hours dragged on. The clock on the wall seemed to be stuck, ticking forward at a crawl. The store grew darker, the silence more suffocating. And yet, every time I looked into the mirror, the reflection of me seemed to shift. It wasn't the same person. I would watch myself go through the motions of work, stocking items, cleaning the counter, except that it was always a few seconds ahead. It would blink before I did, move its hand before I moved mine. The unsettling part was that the reflection didn't act like I did. It moved smoothly, almost deliberately. Each action seemed planned, calculated. But I wasn't doing those things. I was still standing, frozen, watching. It was as if my reflection was living its own version of my night shift. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I had never seen my reflection behave like that before. It was wrong. It was alive. The strangest part? I couldn't pull myself away from it. I couldn't stop staring. As the night wore on, I tried to ignore it, keep my mind busy with other things. But the other me didn't stop. It only grew more confident, more precise in its movements. Eventually, I was no longer the one moving at all. I was just watching. I tried to leave. I tried to go out the back door, but it wouldn't open. I tried to call for help, but my phone refused to work. The automatic doors wouldn't open either, no matter how many times I triggered the sensor. I was trapped. And then, at 4:15 a.m., I saw something that chilled me to my core. The other me, my reflection, it turned and walked out of the frame, out of the mirror. It didn't fade like a normal reflection. It stepped out. It stepped into the store. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick, as I froze. The figure that was me walked toward the counter, toward me. But it wasn't me anymore. I was just standing there, immobile, unable to speak, unable to run. The reflection, it wasn't me. It never was. Stood right in front of me and smiled. Not the smile I had seen before, the grin that had haunted me, but a cold, knowing smile, as if it understood something I didn't. And then, it whispered, "You'll work this shift forever." It was a quiet night at the convenience store, the kind where the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The clock on the wall showed 2:45 a.m. Emily, a lone cashier working the night shift, absent-mindedly rearranged a row of candy bars. The door jingled as it opened, the bell ringing out in the otherwise silent store. A man walked in. He was tall, thin, with pale skin that almost seemed to shimmer under the dim lights. His clothes were old-fashioned, an overcoat with a woolen scarf, a style that hadn't been seen in years. His presence was unsettling, not because of his appearance, but because he seemed out of place, as if he had stepped out of another time. "Good evening," the man said, his voice soft, but strangely resonant. Emily smiled, albeit awkwardly, as she looked up from her task. How can I help you?" The man's eyes met hers. They were a pale blue, almost ghostly, with a depth to them that made her skin prickle. "I'm looking for something warm to drink," he said, glancing at the coffee machine in the corner. "Sure, we have some fresh coffee brewing," Emily replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Just over there." He nodded and slowly made his way toward the coffee station. Emily watched him out of the corner of her eye, trying to shake the odd feeling creeping up her spine. Something was off about him, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was just the late hour. The man stood at the coffee station for what felt like an eternity, inspecting the different flavors, his movements deliberate but stiff. Emily returned to her work, trying to ignore the feeling of unease growing in her chest. Then the man spoke again. "You're working alone tonight," he said, his voice almost too calm. Emily glanced up, surprised by his observation. "Yeah, I am. It's just me tonight." "Why?" He didn't answer right away, instead turning to face her fully. "It must be lonely." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't quite explain it, but his gaze held something almost predatory in it now. "It's not so bad," she replied, forcing a smile. but her hand trembled slightly as she continued stocking the shelves. The man's lips curled into an almost imperceptible smile. "I don't suppose you remember me, do you?" Emily raised an eyebrow, her heart beginning to race. "I don't think so." He took a step closer to the counter, his presence becoming heavier, more oppressive. "You should," he said softly, his tone now laden with an eerie familiarity. "You saw me once before. I was here a few years ago, but you didn't know then." The air around Emily seemed to thicken. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "I don't understand," she said, her voice faltering. The man's smile faded, replaced with a look of sorrowful recognition. "I suppose I should explain. I died a long time ago. A car accident, just a few blocks from here." Emily's stomach dropped. "What?" The man took another step forward. His eyes never left hers, and this time, there was no mistaking the coldness that had settled in them. "I've been stuck here ever since, trying to find a way to move on, but I can't. Not until you remember." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Emily tried to back away, but her legs felt frozen, as if the ground beneath her had turned to ice. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. "Don't you remember?" he asked again, his voice rising with desperation now. "You saw me in the hospital just after the accident. You were the one who helped identify my body." The flood of memories hit her all at once. It was true. She had seen him, not here, not in the store, but in the emergency room. She had been there with her mother, waiting for news on a family friend who had been in a car crash. Emily hadn't known the man's name, but she had seen his body, pale, lifeless, wrapped in a sheet. A brief flash, a fleeting moment, and then she had left. Her hands were shaking now, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The man was still staring at her, his face full of quiet sadness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I didn't know." The man nodded slowly, his gaze softening for just a moment. "You didn't know," he repeated. "But you do now." Suddenly, Emily felt a sharp pain in her chest, a pressure, as though something heavy was bearing down on her heart. She gasped for air, struggling to breathe. Her vision blurred, her head spinning. The lights above flickered, casting the room into intermittent darkness. In the darkness, she heard his voice again. "You're not alone, Emily. Not anymore." The pressure in her chest intensified, and her legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor, her body limp and cold. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat erratic. The man stood above her, watching as the life drained from her body. His face was the same, calm, detached. But there was something in his eyes now, triumph. The last thing Emily saw before the world went black was the man's pale face bending closer, his lips whispering something she couldn't hear. When the paramedics arrived hours later, the store was empty. No sign of the man, no sign of Emily. The security footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, except for one chilling detail. The timestamp on the footage had been altered. The hours Emily had spent talking to the man were gone, erased, as if they had never happened. But in the footage, there was something else. A shadow, standing behind Emily at the counter, just before the lights flickered out. The man had never left. It was 2:15 a.m., a quiet, regular Tuesday. The lights hummed overhead, and the sound of the clicking of a keyboard was the only noise in the sterile office. Evan sat alone at his desk, his eyes glued to the screen, scrolling through email after email. His shift was supposed to end in an hour, but with nothing but endless reports in front of him, he felt the fatigue creep in. The office, usually bustling with co-workers, now sat in a stillness only broken by the soft whirring of machinery. The clock on the wall ticked away, its steady rhythm almost hypnotic, until it suddenly stopped. The second hand, which had been moving so steadily, came to an abrupt halt. He glanced up at the clock, puzzled, thinking it was some minor malfunction. It had happened before, but never for more than a second or two. Yet this felt different. It was as if the room had frozen in time. His eyes narrowed. It was almost as if the air itself had thickened. Evan stood up, a strange unease prickling at the back of his neck. His footsteps echoed too loudly in the stillness of the office, and as he moved toward the door to take a quick break, something caught his attention. There was no sound of the ventilation system, no hum from the fluorescent lights. It was as though the entire world outside his head had stopped. A strange sensation crept up his spine as his gaze shifted back to the clock. The second hand remained unmoving at 2:15 a.m., but now it was wrong. The way it had frozen didn't feel natural. It wasn't just paused. It felt stuck, as if it had caught on something unseen. But that wasn't the most unsettling thing. The most unsettling thing was that everyone was still at their desks. Not a single person had moved. They hadn't stood up, walked to the break room, or even shifted in their seats. They were just there. Evan glanced at his coworker, Stacy. Her face was frozen in the middle of an expression, eyes wide as if she were about to speak, but her lips didn't move. The subtle motion of her hand, which had been raised to adjust her glasses, was suspended mid-air. Time was frozen, but no one seemed to notice. Evan's heart started to race. He moved to the nearest desk, a colleague named Marco's desk, his head bent over his own computer screen. But Marco's fingers hadn't moved from the keyboard. His body was rigid, almost like a mannequin. Every single person was frozen in place except for him. He was the only one not suspended in time. A chill ran through Evan's veins. The air felt cold, almost oppressive. The silence was deafening. But the more he looked around, the more he realized how strange it was that no one seemed to be aware of this. He stepped closer to Marco, his heart pounding. Was he in some kind of dream? His hand hovered over Marco's shoulder, ready to shake him awake. But something stopped him. Marco's face was wrong. It wasn't that it was a grotesque or frightening expression. It was something subtler. His eyes, wide open, seemed hollow, like they were staring straight ahead but not seeing. And there was no depth in his gaze. Evan pulled his hand back, stepping away from the desk. He needed to think. He needed to figure out what was going on. The air felt thick, almost too thick, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched by nothing. As the seconds ticked by, his anxiety grew. He was alone in this frozen world. He moved through the office like a ghost, avoiding the eyes of his frozen coworkers, trying to piece together what was happening. Then, as he passed by the supply closet, something shifted. The flicker of movement caught his peripheral vision. He turned quickly, expecting to see something, anything that would make sense of the situation. But the door of the supply closet was now slightly ajar, even though it hadn't been earlier. He approached it cautiously, his breath shallow. He didn't know why, but something told him that this was where the answer lay. Slowly, he reached out and pulled the door open. Inside was nothing, just shelves of unused office supplies, or so he thought. His eyes caught something on the floor, a small, crumpled piece of paper. He bent down to pick it up. The paper felt old, worn, as if it had been crumpled and uncrumpled many times before. He unfolded it carefully, his mind racing with confusion and fear. "You're not supposed to be here." The words were written in messy, frantic handwriting. He turned the paper over, but there was nothing more. His fingers trembled as he reread it, a knot tightening in his stomach. What did it mean? Who had written this? And more importantly, why did it feel like the world itself was warning him? A loud click broke the silence, and Evan jerked back in shock. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked around. The clock had ticked again. The second hand had moved. Time had started again. But nothing had changed. The same stillness hung in the air. The frozen expressions of his co-workers remained unchanged, their bodies as rigid as statues. Evan's pulse raced. It was like nothing had happened, like time had never stopped. But it had, he was sure of it. He turned back to the clock.
2:16 nachts.
The second hand was moving. It had started again. But no one had moved. No one had noticed. With trembling hands, Evan reached for his phone. He checked the time on it.
2:16 nachts.
The same time, but it was impossible. It felt like 7 minutes had passed, but nothing had changed. The office was still frozen, still silent, as though the world had never stopped. He looked at his co-workers again. They hadn't moved at all. The same still expressions, the same frozen postures. Had he just imagined everything? The crumpled note, the sudden stillness of time, the strange sensation that something was watching him? Evan's stomach turned as he realized something even more unsettling. He couldn't remember how the 7 minutes had passed. It was as if those minutes never existed. They had simply disappeared. The world around him had resumed, but it was wrong. He had been the only one who had experienced the stillness. No one else had noticed. No one had acknowledged it. And the worst part? The nagging thought that lingered in the back of his mind. What if time never stopped at all? What if the 7 minutes were a mistake? Or worse, what if they were meant to happen, but he had interfered with something he didn't understand? The clock ticked again.
2:17 nachts.
And still not a single person had moved. Evan's hands trembled as he lowered the paper to his side. The stillness remained. Every night at 11 p.m., the safety meeting begins. It's a routine, a ritual almost, at this dimly lit warehouse that hums with the monotonous sound of machinery. The employees, grizzled and tired from long hours, gather in the break room, slouched in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, eyes half closed, some still clutching their coffee cups. Most of them barely speak. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint clang of metal echoes in the background. But there's a sense of peace in the monotony. It's just another part of the shift. But tonight was different. It's always different now, though no one talks about it. The clock on the wall ticks over to 11 o'clock, and there she is, standing by the door. She enters with a gentle sweep, her footsteps silent on the linoleum. No one knows when she arrived. No one ever notices her until she begins to speak. Her name is Sarah. No one remembers exactly when she started working here, or why she never seems to show up on the payroll. She doesn't have a name tag. She's not on any of the rosters or HR files. But every night, she leads the safety meetings. Her presence is always unsettling. Her smile too wide. Her voice too calm, too controlled. It's almost soothing, like a lullaby, except it never eases your nerves. It sharpens them. "All right, everyone, settle in," she says. Her voice soft but commanding, cutting through the static of tired murmurs. No one objects. It's as if they're waiting for this moment. They don't have a choice. She walks to the front of the room, flipping through a binder that she carries with her. One that no one has ever seen before, its pages filled with documents none of the staff recognizes. She pauses for a brief moment, adjusting her glasses, and then she starts the meeting. We'll begin tonight with the usual checks. We all know the basics: emergency exits, fire hazards, first aid kits. Her voice trails off, but it's as if something more is being communicated. Something that's just below the surface. Not quite audible, but undeniably present. You know the drill, Sarah continues, her eyes scanning each person in the room. Her gaze lingers on the newcomers, like she's memorizing their faces. But tonight we have a special topic. We'll talk about safety in isolation. A shiver runs down the spine of the room, though no one moves. They sit, frozen in place, some glancing at the clock as if waiting for the meeting to end. But no one says anything. You see, there are dangers in this building that we don't speak of. She continues, her tone now shifting slightly, growing softer, almost too soothing. You know what I mean. The noises. The things that happen when the machines break down or when no one's around. The things you don't hear but feel. Those things are real, and they'll always be with us. But if we prepare ourselves properly, we can handle it. Safety is about more than just what's on paper. Her eyes fixate on one of the workers, a man named Gary who's been here for nearly a decade. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat, unable to look away from her, though he tries. I know what you're thinking, Gary, Sarah continues, her smile not faltering for even a second. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Of course you have. We all have. The power surges, the shadows in the corners of the warehouse, the way some of the doors lock on their own even when no one's near them. Gary's lips twitch, his hand gripping the edge of the chair, knuckles white. He tries to speak, but his voice betrays him. I don't know what you mean. Oh, but you do, Gary, Sarah says, her voice soft, coaxing, as if she's speaking to a child. You know, we all do, don't we? The room remains silent, the only sound being the occasional clink of a cup being set down. The clock on the wall continues ticking, but time itself seems to slow, stretching out the seconds, elongating them until they feel like minutes. Sarah flips through the binder again, but this time the pages stick. She pulls them apart with delicate fingers, as though they're fragile, too fragile to be disturbed. When the pages settle, she looks up and smiles again, but this smile doesn't reach her eyes. Let's move on, she says, the softness never leaving her tone, though the undercurrent of something darker lingers. We've all been here long enough to know the other rules, the ones that aren't written down, the ones that, well, let's just say, they're more important than you think. Gary shifts again, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He opens his mouth, but Sarah raises a hand. He stops. You know, Gary, she says, her voice dropping low, almost a whisper. There's something particularly important about the night shift, about the silence, about the space between us, the way things change after hours, the way people disappear. They go home, but sometimes they don't leave. Gary's breath catches in his throat. He opens his mouth, but the words won't come. It's as if something is blocking him, pressing down on his chest, making it impossible to speak. He looks around the room, but no one else seems to be noticing. They're all staring straight ahead at Sarah, as if they've heard this all before, as if this is normal. I think it's time for a little reminder, Sarah continues, turning a page in the binder with a slow, deliberate motion. It's time to remember the rules we don't talk about, the ones we don't acknowledge in the light of day. The room feels colder now. The lights flicker, casting long shadows that seem to stretch unnaturally, curling up the walls. The clock ticks louder, as if trying to break the silence that has settled in. Sarah's eyes narrow as she scans the room again, and this time, her gaze lingers on Gary longer than before. It's important to remember, you see, that not everything can be explained, she says, her voice almost a whisper now. And some things aren't meant to be understood. Gary's heart races in his chest. He's not sure why, but he knows deep down that this meeting is about more than just safety. Suddenly, there's a loud bang from the back of the room. The door, the one that no one ever uses, shakes violently. The air grows thick, like it's pressing in from all sides. No one reacts. No one even moves. The room is frozen, suspended in time, as Sarah's smile grows wider and wider and wider still. She turns her back to the group for a moment, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "You'll all understand soon enough," she whispers, barely audible. "In time, you'll all understand." The lights flicker one last time, and when they return, Sarah is gone. The binder is gone. The door is back in place, silent once again. The clock ticks on. The meeting is over. But no one moves. No one dares to. And as the workers file out, one by one, their eyes flicker to the corner of the room where Sarah stood. They leave the building, each of them haunted by the same thought. Where did she go? And the worst part? They all know the truth. Sarah was never on staff. But she's always there. Always. Watching. Waiting. And they'll never forget. Not for a second. There's a certain level of comfort in routine. When you work the night shift long enough, everything starts to feel predictable. The hum of the air conditioner, the clink of keys on the counter, the silent shuffle of your coworkers who are just as tired as you, if not more. But that's the thing about night shifts, they lull you into a false sense of security. And then, out of nowhere, something happens. Something that doesn't make sense. Something that breaks the very fabric of reality you've become accustomed to. It started like any other shift. I was the only one scheduled to work in the office that night. The others had all left hours earlier, and the place felt eerily quiet. The phone didn't ring, and the email inbox remained unchanged. There was a slight creak of the fluorescent lights above me, but nothing that would make anyone stop and wonder. I sat at my desk, half drunk on coffee, trying to focus on the mountain of paperwork that always seemed to pile up during the graveyard shift. Around midnight, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. I glanced up, expecting to see one of the cleaning staff or a fellow employee, but no one appeared. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, as if someone were walking toward me. I felt my pulse quicken, my gaze darting around the empty office. The sound grew louder, then stopped just outside my cubicle. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one there. I was alone. Yet, the sound of those steps remained, lingering in the air like a memory that hadn't quite faded. I shook it off. Just the stress of the night, I thought. Maybe I was imagining things. Then, as I was about to dive back into my paperwork, something caught my eye. On the corner of my desk, nestled between a stack of reports, was a small cardboard box labeled Lost and Found. I didn't recall seeing it there earlier, but that wasn't the strangest part. The box was positioned in a way that suggested it had been placed there just moments ago. There was no note, no explanation, just the box. It was as if it had appeared out of thin air. Curiosity gnawed at me. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that, but I did anyway. I flipped open the lid, and at first I didn't recognize anything inside. A few stray pens, a forgotten coffee mug, a stack of paper clips, and a name tag. I stared at it for a moment before my brain caught up. There, embossed in bold black letters on the tag, was my name, my full name, Jordan Carson. I reached for it, fingers trembling. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a coincidence. Maybe someone else had the same name. But no, that couldn't be right. I'd been working here for 3 years, and I was the only Jordan Carson on the staff. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd worn a name tag. We didn't even use them in this office. My heart began to race. My palms were slick with sweat. The weight of the room seemed to press in around me. I turned the name tag over, hoping to find some explanation, but there was nothing, just a blank, smooth surface. I tossed it back in the box, feeling a strange sense of unease settle in my chest. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to pop up from behind a corner or walk through the door, laughing, revealing that it had all been some elaborate prank. But there was no one, just the empty, hollow quiet of the office. The footsteps returned, this time louder than before, and they weren't stopping. I stood up quickly, adrenaline surging through me. My mind raced, my thoughts jumbled. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here any longer. But as I moved toward the door, I froze. The footsteps weren't just in the hallway now. They were inside the office. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the office remained empty, just as it had been for hours. Yet, the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, was unmistakable. The air around me felt thick, almost as if the space itself were holding its breath. My skin prickled with cold. It wasn't just the footsteps that unsettled me. It was the unmistakable feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. I couldn't see them, but I felt their presence, like a shadow just out of sight. I turned back to the lost and found box. In my panic, I had almost forgotten about it. I glanced inside again, and there, tucked beneath the name tag, was something new, a set of keys. I recognized them instantly. They were the keys to my car. The same set I always carried with me, the ones in my pocket just a few hours earlier. I reached for them without thinking, fingers trembling as I pulled them out. But something wasn't right. The keys looked worn, older than mine, and as I examined them more closely, I saw that one of them had a small, jagged crack running through it, as if it had been broken and hastily repaired. Couldn't breathe. Something was wrong. But before I could react, the footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow and steady, just behind me. I spun around again, eyes wide with terror, but still, no one was there. The keys slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to pick them up, but my fingers fumbled. As I reached for them, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a reflection. In the glass of the office door, I saw a figure standing just behind me, tall, thin, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. But what made my blood run cold was the face. It wasn't mine, yet it was. The features were too similar, the eyes too familiar. But the expression, it wasn't me. The face in the reflection was grinning. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The air in the room grew thick with tension. My vision blurred, my pulse pounding in my ears. I grabbed the name tag, shoved it into my pocket, and bolted out of the office. I didn't look back. But even as I drove home that night, even as I tried to shake off the terror that gripped me, one thought refused to leave my mind. Who had left my name in the lost and found box? And why did it feel like I was never meant to leave?